When my daughter Sarah changed the locks on my apartment after learning I'd been laid off at age 65, leaving me with just 2 suitcases and nowhere to go, she never imagined that 6 months later I'd be inviting her to the housewarming of my new beachfront property, or that she'd discover I was worth over $3.7 million from an inheritance I'd kept secret for decades. A revelation that would teach her valuable lessons about appearances, compassion, and the true meaning of family security. Before we continue, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow I'm sharing another family story that will completely change how you think about retirement planning. Now, let's get back to it. This photo was taken at my 65th birthday party just 4 months before everything fell apart. There I am, smiling in the center, with Sarah beside me, her arm draped casually around my shoulders. My son-in-law, Kevin, stands on my other side, looking polished in his designer suit, and my teenage grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, are making silly faces in the front. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing soon?" Sarah had asked minutes before this picture was taken. "That apartment is so expensive for just one person, especially on a receptionist's salary." "I'm comfortable where I am," I'd replied, sipping my champagne. "But the market is hot right now," Kevin interjected. "You could move into something more age-appropriate and put some money aside for the future." My mother used to tell me, "Margaret, people reveal their contingency plans for you long before they reveal their true hearts." I should have paid attention to the signs: Sarah's increasing interest in my finances, Kevin's pointed questions about my retirement savings, their suggestions that I could move into their guest house someday when things get difficult. I'd worked as an executive assistant at Denham & Associates for 37 years. Nothing glamorous, but steady work that had allowed me to raise Sarah after her father left when she was just 4. I'd put her through college, helped with the down payment on her first house, and been the emergency childcare provider throughout her early career. My 2-bedroom apartment in the older part of town was my sanctuary, filled with books, mementos, and the peace I'd earned after decades of single motherhood. What Sarah didn't know was that my simple life was a choice, not a necessity. 29. Years earlier, my Uncle Edward had passed away, leaving me an inheritance that had grown to over $3 million. Uncle Edward had been the black sheep of the family who made his fortune in international shipping. He'd never married and had always had a soft spot for me, his favorite niece who wrote him letters even during the years everyone else forgot him. "She's the only one who remembered I existed before the money," he'd told his lawyer. I received the news of my inheritance the same week Sarah turned 16 and threw a tantrum over not getting the exact car she wanted for her birthday. That moment crystallized something for me. I didn't want wealth to change how I raised my daughter or how she saw the world. So I kept the inheritance secret. I arranged for it to be managed by a trust with specific instructions that I couldn't access the principal until I turned 65, except in dire emergencies. I continued working, living on my salary, raising Sarah with the values I believed in: hard work, appreciation for what you have, and the understanding that material things aren't what matter most. For 29 years, I watched the inheritance grow while keeping my modest lifestyle. I wanted Sarah to develop her own work ethic, to appreciate the value of money earned rather than inherited. I'd planned to tell her about the inheritance after my 65th birthday, but then everything changed. 2 weeks after my birthday celebration, Mr. Denham called me into his office. The firm was being acquired by a larger company, and they would be streamlining operations. After nearly 4 decades of service, I was being laid off with a severance package that would only sustain me for about 6 months. Before I could process this change, Sarah called, her voice unusually tense. Her friend Diane from HR had mentioned seeing my name on the layoff list. When Sarah arrived that evening, her concern seemed genuine at first. "Mom, why didn't you tell me immediately?" she asked, pacing my living room while Kevin sat silently, tapping numbers into his phone calculator. "I was going to," I explained. I just needed a few days to figure out my next steps. Next steps? Sarah stopped pacing, her expression hardening. Mom, you're 65 with no job and minimal savings. There's only one next step that makes sense. Kevin looked up from his phone. Your severance and Social Security won't cover this apartment, Margaret, not even close. The speed with which their concern transformed into financial calculations was jarring. There was no discussion of whether I might find another job, no acknowledgement of my decades of experience, no exploration of what I wanted. I have some savings, I said carefully, not yet ready to reveal the full truth when their reaction was already making me uneasy. And I might do some consulting work. Sarah and Kevin exchanged a look I recognized too well, the kind adults give each other when an elderly relative says something they consider delusional. Mom, Sarah said, her voice dropping into the gentle tone one might use with a confused child. We need to be realistic here. You can't afford this place anymore, and at your age, finding new employment is unlikely. We've actually been discussing this, Kevin added. The timing is perfect in a way. We're renovating the pool house anyway. With some modifications, it would make an ideal mother-in-law suite. I stared at them, trying to process what was happening. They'd been planning for my financial downfall, creating contingency housing for me without any discussion. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to give up my independence. Sarah's expression hardened. This isn't about independence, Mom. It's about financial reality. You raised me to be practical about money, remember? Well, I'm being practical now. You can't afford to live alone anymore. The conversation deteriorated from there. What began as concern revealed itself as control. Sarah and Kevin had already decided what would happen. I would sell most of my furniture, which wouldn't fit in the pool house anyway, surrender my lease and move into their renovated outbuilding. My severance would be contributed toward the renovation costs as rent in advance. When I suggested I might want to consider other options, Sarah's patience evaporated. Other options? With what money, Mom? Do you have some secret fortune you haven't told us about? The irony of her question hit me like a physical blow. Yes, actually, I did. But something stopped me from revealing it in that moment. The calculating look in their eyes, the way they'd already planned my diminishment without consulting me, the ease with which they dismissed my agency. All of it warned me to proceed carefully. I just need some time to think, I said finally. There isn't time, Kevin replied. Your severance won't last forever. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised alone, sacrificed for, supported through every life challenge, and saw a stranger looking back at me. When had her concern for me transformed into this presumptuous authority over my life? The next morning, I called my lawyer, Thomas Abernathy, who had managed my uncle's trust all these years. I needed advice not just about the inheritance, but about how to handle this unexpected family dynamic. What I couldn't know then was that Sarah and Kevin had already set their plan in motion, and that their next actions would force me into decisions. I never imagined creating a family rift that would ultimately lead to that moment, 6 months later, when the truth would finally be revealed in ways that would change all of us forever. Thomas Abernathy's law office hadn't changed in the 29 years I'd known him. The same oak desk, the same leather-bound law books lining the walls, even the same slightly faded oriental rug. There was something comforting about that consistency as I sat across from him the morning after Sarah and Kevin's visit, my hands clutching a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. So they don't know about the inheritance at all? Thomas asked, peering at me over his reading glasses after I'd explained the situation. No, I admitted. I always planned to tell Sarah after I turned 65, but I wanted it to be the right moment. I wanted her to understand why I kept it private all these years. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And now, with the job loss, You're concerned about how to approach this revelation. It's not just that, I said, setting down the untouched coffee. It's how quickly Sarah and Kevin moved to take control. They didn't ask what I wanted or needed. They just decided. And now I feel that if I tell them about the money, I'll never know if their attention comes from love or self-interest. Thomas finished, nodding. I've seen this scenario more times than I can count, Margaret, though usually it's when the money is revealed after death, not during life. He opened a folder containing the trust documents, reviewing the terms we'd established decades earlier. The good news is that you now have full access to your inheritance. The principal, plus growth, puts you at approximately $3.7 million. You have complete freedom to use these funds however you wish. The figure still startled me, even though I'd watched the statements grow over the years. It represented freedom, security, and choices I'd deliberately postponed for nearly 3 decades. What would you recommend? I asked. Thomas removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. That depends on what you want your relationship with Sarah to look like going forward. There are several approaches we could take. We spent the next hour discussing options, weighing the personal and financial implications of each. By the time I left his office, I had a plan, not just for handling my sudden wealth, but for navigating this unexpected crossroads with my daughter. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly I'd need to implement that plan. When I returned to my apartment that afternoon, I found a moving truck in the parking lot and Sarah directing 2 burly men who were carrying boxes from the building. My building. My floor. My heart sank as I approached and saw my address on the paperwork clipboard. Sarah looked up, her expression a mixture of determination and momentary guilt that quickly hardened into righteousness. "Mom," she said, stepping toward me, "I was going to call you. We decided it makes more sense to get this done quickly rather than drag it out. Kevin found a storage unit for the furniture that won't fit in the pool house and—" "Sarah," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the shock. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She blinked, seemingly surprised by my tone. "Helping you, of course. We talked about this yesterday. The pool house renovations are starting Monday, and we need to get your things moved before then. The property management company already approved breaking your lease under the hardship clause." The casual way she referenced making arrangements with my landlord without my consent stunned me into momentary silence. I didn't agree to any of this, I finally managed. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to something closer to pity. "Mom, we both know this is the only practical solution. I've already given notice at your apartment. The manager was very understanding given your situation." The moving men continued carrying boxes past us, looking uncomfortable at the tension but unwilling to stop working. "You had no right," I said, my voice low but firm. "This is my home, my life. You can't just make these decisions for me." Kevin appeared from inside the building, carrying a small box of what looked like my personal papers. "Margaret, there you are. Good timing. We could use your help sorting what to take to our place versus what goes to storage." The casual presumption that I would simply fall in line with their plans ignited something in me I hadn't felt in years. A fierce, protective anger not for Sarah this time, but for myself. "Stop," I commanded, using the voice that had once halted toddler tantrums and teenage rebellions. "Stop right now." To my surprise, everyone froze. The movers, Kevin, even Sarah. "Put those boxes back. All of them. Right now." One of the movers looked to Sarah uncertainly. "Ma'am?" Sarah recovered quickly. "Mom, don't make a scene. We're doing what's best for you. If you'd just—" "What's best for me?" I echoed, incredulous. "You didn't ask what I wanted. You didn't consult me. You broke into my apartment and started packing up my life without my permission." "We didn't break in," Kevin corrected, his tone condescending. "Sarah has a key, and as your next of kin—" "I'm not dead or incapacitated," I cut in. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. Mom, I know this is hard. Change is difficult at your age. But you're not thinking clearly about your financial situation. The numbers simply don't work for you to live independently anymore. The patronizing tone, the assumption of my cognitive decline, the complete dismissal of my autonomy. It was all suddenly too much. Put my things back, I repeated, or I will call the police and report this as theft. You wouldn't, Sarah gasped, genuinely shocked. Try me. The next hour was tense and humiliating. The movers, caught in an uncomfortable family dispute, reluctantly returned my belongings under Sarah's sullen direction. Neighbors peeked out of their apartments, curious about the commotion. I stood my ground, arms crossed, as my life was haphazardly. Returned to my apartment, boxes unopened, furniture scratched from the hasty movements. When the movers finally departed, Sarah and Kevin remained, both visibly angry now that we were in private. I don't understand you, Sarah said, her voice trembling with frustration. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the enemy. Help looks like asking what I need, not telling me what I'm going to do, I replied, surveying the chaos of my partially packed and returned belongings. Help looks like respecting my wishes. Kevin checked his watch impatiently. Margaret, with all due respect, you don't have the luxury of wishes anymore. You're unemployed at 65 with negligible savings. These aren't just our opinions, these are financial facts. You don't know all the facts, I said quietly. Then enlighten us, Sarah snapped, because from where I'm standing, you're making a terrible decision based on pride instead of practicality. I considered revealing the truth then, showing them the trust documents, explaining Uncle Edward's inheritance, watching their expressions transform from condescension to surprise. But something held me back. The way they had acted, the presumption, the complete disregard for my autonomy. I wasn't ready to reward that behavior with financial revelations. I need time to sort through my options, I said instead. Without interference. Kevin shook his head in disgust. There are no other options, Margaret. That's what we're trying to make you understand. Sarah's expression had shifted from anger to something harder, colder. Fine. Take your time. But understand this. We've already canceled the pool house renovations. If you change your mind later, that offer won't be available. And neither will we, Kevin added, his tone making the threat explicit. You're choosing isolation over family, support. Remember that when you're struggling to make ends meet. After they left, I sat among the boxes and disarray of my apartment, shaking with a mixture of anger and an odd sense of liberation. For the first time in decades, I saw my relationship with Sarah with absolute clarity, and what I saw broke my heart. Somewhere along the way, her perception of me had transformed from mother to burden, from advisor to dependent, from person to problem. I spent that evening putting my apartment back in order, thinking about what Thomas and I had discussed. The options seemed clearer now after Sarah and Kevin's actions. I needed space, not just physical space, but emotional space to decide how to move forward with both my newfound financial freedom and my damaged relationship with my daughter. The next morning, I called Thomas to accelerate our plans. By afternoon, I had transferred a significant portion of my inheritance to an accessible account and begun researching short-term housing options. I wasn't ready to make permanent decisions yet, but I needed a sanctuary where I could think without fear of Sarah returning with more moving trucks or ultimatums. 3 days later, I was packing my own boxes, carefully, methodically, taking only what I truly needed for the next few months. I'd found a furnished short-term rental in a beautiful coastal town about 2 hours away, a place where I'd always dreamed of spending time but had never indulged because of work commitments and proximity to Sarah's family. I was just sealing the last box when my phone rang, Sarah's ringtone. I hesitated before answering. "Mom?" she began without preamble. Kevin and I have been talking, and we think we've found a compromise. There's a senior living community about 20 minutes from us. It's not exactly independent living, but it's not a nursing home either. They have activities, meals provided. We could visit regularly. The unstated assumption was still there, that I couldn't manage on my own, that I needed their supervision, that my life should revolve around their convenience. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said carefully. "But I've made other arrangements." "What?" "Arrangements?" Sarah's voice sharpened with suspicion. "Mom, please tell me you haven't done something financially reckless." The irony almost made me laugh. "I've found a place that suits my needs." "Where? What place? How are you paying for it?" The rapid-fire questions held that familiar tone of assumed authority. "I'll let you know once I'm settled," I replied, unwilling to subject my new beginning to her judgment or interference. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're not thinking clearly. If you'd just—" "Sarah," I interrupted gently, "I love you. I always will. But I need some time and space right now. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." I ended the call as she was still protesting, then turned my phone off completely. The silence felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, a small moving company I'd hired arrived to take my selected belongings to my new temporary home. As I handed over my keys to the property manager and climbed into my car to follow the moving truck, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the relationship I'd thought I had with my daughter, anxiety about starting over at 65, but underneath it all, a surprising current of excitement. For the first time in decades, I was making choices based entirely on my own desires, without filtering them through concerns about modeling financial responsibility or maintaining a particular image for Sarah's benefit. The inheritance that had been waiting patiently for all these years was finally going to serve its purpose, not just providing financial security, but offering me the freedom to discover who Margaret could be when she wasn't defined solely as Sarah's practical, frugal, self-sacrificing mother. What I couldn't know as I drove away from my old life was that my silence over the coming weeks would push Sarah to actions even more dramatic than the moving truck incident, actions that would ultimately force a confrontation neither of us was prepared for, but both of us needed. The coastal town of Seabrook welcomed me with salt-scented air and horizon views that made my soul expand. My furnished rental was a modest but charming cottage just 2 blocks from the beach, with a small garden patio where I could enjoy my morning coffee while listening to seagulls instead of city traffic. For the first week, I kept my phone turned off, allowing myself to decompress from the tension and drama of recent events. I walked on the beach each morning, explored local shops in the afternoons, and spent evenings sitting on my patio watching spectacular sunsets paint the sky in colors I'd forgotten existed after decades of city living. I'd expected to feel guilty about this self-imposed isolation from Sarah, but instead found myself experiencing an unexpected emotion: relief. The constant weight of her expectations, her judgment, her assumption of my eventual dependence, all of it had been weighing on me far more heavily than I'd realized. On day 8, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately erupted with notifications: 27 missed calls from Sarah, 14 from Kevin, dozens of text messages ranging from concerned to angry to outright threatening. The final message, sent just the previous evening, caught my attention. "Mom, this has gone on long enough. If we don't hear from you by tomorrow, we're filing a missing person report and contacting Adult Protective Services. Your behavior is proving you can't make sound decisions." The threat was so outrageous I almost laughed. I was 65, not 95. I'd worked my entire adult life, raised a child alone, managed a household, and maintained perfect credit through economic ups and downs. Yet somehow, losing a job had transformed me in my daughter's eyes from competent adult to incompetent elder requiring intervention. I called her immediately, bracing myself for the conversation. "Mom, Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice a mixture of relief and anger. "Where are you? We've been worried sick. Are you okay?" "Why haven't you answered our calls?" "I'm fine, Sarah," I replied calmly. "I told you I needed some space and would contact you when I was settled." "It's been over a week," she exclaimed. "We were about to call the police. Where are you staying? How are you paying for it? Please tell me you haven't fallen for some scam or—" "Sarah," I interrupted firmly, "I appreciate your concern, but I am an adult who is perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I've found a lovely place to stay while I figure out my next steps." "What place? Where?" The demanding tone had returned to her voice. "I'm in Seabrook, in a nice rental near the beach." There was a moment of stunned silence before Sarah exploded. "Seabrook? That tourist trap? Mom, those rentals are outrageously expensive. What are you thinking? You can't afford—" "My finances are not your concern," I stated, a newfound steadiness in my voice. "Not my concern?" Sarah's pitch rose with indignation. "Who do you think is going to have to bail you out when you run through your severance-paying beach vacation? Who's going to have to take care of you when—" "No one," I said simply. "I don't need taking care of, Sarah. I never have." "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she replied, her voice dropping to that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "You're not thinking rationally. First the job loss, now this impulsive move to a place you can't afford. Mom, I think you might be experiencing some cognitive decline. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but you need to come home so we can get you evaluated." The casual armchair diagnosis struck me as both laughable and deeply offensive. "I am perfectly cognizant, Sarah. My cognitive abilities are intact, as is my ability to manage my own affairs." "Then how are you affording this place?" she demanded. "You were worried about making rent at your apartment, but suddenly you can afford a beach rental? It doesn't add up, Mom." I took a deep breath, considering how much to reveal. This wasn't how I'd planned to tell her about the inheritance, but her assumptions were becoming intolerable. "I have resources you don't know about," I said carefully. "What does that mean?" Suspicion colored her tone. "Mom, if you've taken out some predatory loan or cashed out your retirement savings—" "I have not," I assured her, growing increasingly frustrated with her assumptions. "Sarah, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." "Trust requires transparency," she countered. "You're clearly hiding something." The irony of her demand for transparency when she had attempted to pack up my apartment without permission wasn't lost on me. "Yes," I acknowledged, "I am. And when I'm ready, I'll explain everything. But right now, I need time to myself without judgment or interference." "Mom, this isn't like you," Sarah persisted. "You've always been practical, cautious with money. Now suddenly you're acting like someone who knows her own mind," I suggested. "Like someone who has options beyond what you've decided for her?" The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Sarah threatening to come to Seabrook to sort this out in person, and me making it clear that such a visit would not be welcome until she could approach me as an equal adult rather than a problem to be managed. After hanging up, I sat on my patio watching waves break against the shore, wondering how my relationship with my daughter had become so fundamentally distorted. I'd wanted to raise her to be independent, to understand the value of work and money. But somehow that lesson had transformed into a kind of financial elitism, where worth and competence were measured solely by income and assets. Later that afternoon, I met with a local real estate agent. My plan had been to rent temporarily while considering my options, but a week in Seabrook had convinced me this was where I wanted to be. The agent, Denise, showed me several properties within my secretly substantial budget, but none felt quite right until we visited a blue-gray Cape Cod-style house perched on a bluff with panoramic ocean views. The moment I stepped onto the wraparound porch and heard the rhythm of waves below, Something settled in my soul. This was it, the home I hadn't even known I was looking for. "It's gorgeous," I breathed, taking in the light-filled rooms with their clean lines and breathtaking views. "It just came on the market last week," Denise explained. "The owners are relocating for work. It needs some updating, but the structure is sound and the location is unbeatable." The asking price was significant, but well within my means given the inheritance. After a thorough inspection and some negotiation, I made an offer that was accepted the following day. Thomas handled the financial arrangements, transferring funds discreetly and efficiently. 3 weeks after arriving in Seabrook as a temporary visitor, I became a homeowner in this seaside community. The purchase felt both terrifying and exhilarating, the most significant financial decision I'd ever made independently, without considering Sarah's opinion or how it might impact her view of me. I spent the next month making the house my own, replacing dated appliances, refreshing paint colors, and carefully selecting furniture that reflected my taste rather than practical necessity. I joined a local book club, volunteered at the community library, and gradually began building connections in my new hometown. Throughout this time, communication with Sarah remained strained. After her threat to visit uninvited, I had established clear boundaries. I would call once a week, but I wouldn't discuss my finances or justify my decisions. Our conversations were brief and superficial, with an undercurrent of tension neither of us addressed directly. Then came the incident that forced everything into the open. Was at the local hardware store selecting paint samples for my guest bedroom when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Margaret Wilson?" a male voice asked when I answered. "Yes, it is," I confirmed. "Ms. Wilson, this is Dr. Reynolds from Coastal Regional Medical Center. I'm calling because your daughter, Sarah Baker, was admitted about an hour ago." My heart dropped. "What happened? Is she all right?" "She's stable," he assured me. "She was in a minor car accident, nothing life-threatening, but she has a concussion and a broken wrist. She's asking for you." I thanked him for the information and promised to come immediately. The hospital was about 20 minutes from my new home, and I drove there with my mind racing. Whatever our recent conflicts, Sarah was still my daughter, and the thought of her injured and in pain overrode every other consideration. When I arrived at the hospital, I was directed to the emergency department where I found Sarah in a curtained alcove, her left wrist in a temporary cast, a small bandage on her forehead. Kevin sat beside her, his expression changing from concern to surprise when he saw me. "Mom," Sarah said weakly, tears filling her eyes. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, moving to her side and gently taking her uninjured hand. "You're my daughter. Are you all right? What happened?" "It was stupid," she admitted. "I was distracted, texting while driving. I ran off the road and hit a guardrail." She squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry for all the things I said, Mom. When they were asking for emergency contacts, you were the only person I wanted." The vulnerability in her voice reminded me sharply of the little girl she'd once been, the child who had crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who had called for me when she was sick or frightened. Whatever had gone wrong between us as adults, that core connection remained. We sat together while the doctor explained her injuries and treatment plan. The concussion was mild, the wrist fracture clean and already set. She would be released that evening with instructions for follow-up care. "She'll need someone to help her for the next few days," Dr. Reynolds explained. "Basic tasks will be difficult with the cast, and the concussion may cause dizziness and disorientation." "I'll take care of it," Kevin started to say, but Sarah interrupted. "Could you stay with us for a few days, Mom?" she asked hesitantly. "Kevin has that important conference in Chicago starting tomorrow, and the kids have school and activities. I know things have been strained between us, but I could really use your help." The request surprised me, not just the practical need for assistance, but the acknowledgement of our troubled relationship and her willingness to reach across that divide. "Of course," I agreed without hesitation. Whatever you need. As we made arrangements for Sarah's discharge, Kevin pulled me aside, his expression uncomfortable. "Margaret, I appreciate you coming to help," he said stiffly. "But I should mention, we converted your old room, the guest room, into a home gym after you left. There's a sofa in my office that pulls out, but it's not very comfortable." The awkward explanation made it clear. They had literally erased the space that should have been mine in their home, just as they had attempted to erase my independence from their conception of my future. "Don't worry about it," I replied. "I can stay at a hotel nearby." Kevin looked relieved, then hesitant. "About that, we'd offer to cover it, but with Sarah's medical bills and my travel expenses this month." I almost laughed at the familiar dance, the assumption of my financial limitations, the subtle reminder of their relative prosperity, the performative concern that nonetheless expected me to accommodate their needs rather than the reverse. "Can manage a hotel bill, Kevin," I said simply. He nodded, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to press the point under the circumstances. Later that evening, after helping Sarah get settled at home with her medication and care instructions, I checked into a nearby hotel. As I prepared for bed, I realized that tomorrow would bring an unavoidable confrontation with reality. I would be spending significant time in Sarah and Kevin's home, where they would inevitably notice the changes in my circumstances. My new car, my ability to stay in a hotel without financial strain, the subtle shifts in my appearance and confidence that came with reclaiming my autonomy. Sooner or later, questions would arise that I couldn't deflect. Perhaps this accident, for all its unfortunate circumstances, was providing the opportunity I needed to finally reveal the truth, not just about my financial situation, but about the reasons I had kept it secret for so long. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself rehearsing the conversation I'd delayed for 29 years, hoping that crisis might create an opening for understanding where ordinary interaction had failed. What I couldn't anticipate was how dramatically this revelation would unfold, or how it would force Sarah to confront not just my secrets, but her own assumptions about money, security, and the true nature of mother-daughter relationships. The morning after Sarah's accident, I arrived at her house early, bringing fresh pastries from a bakery near my hotel and a small overnight bag with essentials for helping care for her. Kevin answered the door, already dressed in a business suit and clearly rushing to leave for his conference. "Thanks for coming," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Sarah's still asleep. The pain medication knocked her out. Her medication schedule is on the fridge, and the kids should be up soon for school." He checked his watch. "I need to catch my flight. I'll be back Thursday evening." With barely a backward glance, he was gone, leaving me to navigate an unexpectedly domestic role in the household I'd been decisively excluded from just weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I made coffee and waited for signs of life from the rest of the house. Eventually, Emma and Tyler stumbled into the kitchen, both stopping short when they saw me instead of their mother. "Grandma?" Emma said, surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Your mom had a car accident yesterday," I explained gently. "She's okay, but she has a concussion and a broken wrist. I'm here to help while your dad is at his conference." Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson who had recently hit a growth spurt that made him tower over me, frowned. "But I thought you moved away. Mom said you were having some issues." The careful phrasing made me wonder exactly what narrative Sarah had shared with her children about my departure. Issues could mean anything from financial problems to mental decline. "I did move," I confirmed, choosing my words carefully, "to a lovely coastal town called Seabrook, but I came back to help your mom when I heard about the accident. I prepared breakfast for the teenagers while answering their cautious questions about where I'd been and what I'd been doing." Neither mentioned the moving truck incident or the conflict that had preceded my departure, suggesting Sarah had sheltered them from the uglier aspects of our disagreement. After they left for school, I checked on Sarah, who was awake but groggy from pain medication. I helped her to the bathroom, brought her fresh water and toast, and ensured she took her morning medications. "You didn't have to come back for this," she said, her voice softened by medication and what seemed like genuine regret. "Not after how things were between us." "You're my daughter," I replied simply. "That hasn't changed." We existed in a strange truce that first day, both carefully avoiding the subjects that had driven us apart. I helped her with basic needs, prepared meals for the family, and generally stepped back into the maternal role I'd occupied for decades. It was on the second day that the careful facade began to crack. Sarah was more alert, the strongest pain, medications reduced, and with that clarity came the return of her observant nature. She noticed my new clothes, subtle upgrades from the bargain-focused wardrobe I'd maintained throughout her childhood. She commented on my new phone, a significant improvement over the basic model I'd used for years. And she couldn't miss the luxury sedan I now drove, visible through the living room window where I'd parked it in the driveway. "Mom," she finally said that afternoon as I arranged pillows to elevate her injured arm, "what's going on with you?" "Everything is different." I sat in the armchair across from her sofa. "What do you mean?" She gestured vaguely with her uninjured hand. "The car, the clothes, the hotel instead of staying with friends or asking about a guest rate." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You said you had resources I didn't know about. What does that mean exactly?" The moment had arrived sooner than I'd anticipated. I took a deep breath, considering how to begin a conversation I'd rehearsed in my mind for years, but never actually held. "Sarah, do you remember your great-uncle Edward?" She frowned, clearly confused by this apparent non sequitur. "Vaguely. Mom's uncle who made money in shipping or something? He died when I was a teenager." "That's right. He passed away when you were 16. I paused, gathering my thoughts. "What you don't know is that Edward left me an inheritance, a substantial inheritance." Sarah stared at me, incomprehension slowly giving way to disbelief. "What? That's not possible. You would have told me. We would have used it for what?" I asked gently. "For everything," she exclaimed, wincing as the sudden movement jarred her injured wrist. "For a better apartment, for college without student loans, for, I don't know, all the things we went without. Why would you keep something like that secret?" The hurt in her voice was genuine, and I realized that however carefully I had planned this revelation, there was no way to prevent it from feeling like a betrayal to her. "The inheritance came with conditions," I explained, which was partially true. I couldn't access the principal until I turned 65, except in emergencies. Sarah processed this, her expression cycling through confusion, hurt, and growing anger. "But that was almost 30 years ago. You've been sitting on this secret for my entire adult life, watching me struggle with money, with childcare costs, with mortgage payments? How could you do that?" "It wasn't about withholding help from you," I tried to explain. "It was about ensuring the money didn't change how I raised you or how you saw the world." "That wasn't your decision to make." Her voice rose sharply. "You let me believe we were one emergency away from financial disaster my entire childhood. Do you know what that does to a kid? The anxiety, the constant worry?" I hadn't anticipated this particular reaction. In my mind, I'd raised Sarah to be responsible and appreciative, not fearful. "I never meant for you to feel insecure, Sarah. I wanted you to develop a strong work ethic, to value earning your own way." "At what cost?" she demanded. "I've spent my entire adult life obsessed with financial security because I watched you. Pinch every penny, clip every coupon, wear the same clothes for years. I pushed myself into a career I don't even enjoy because it promised stability. And all that time, you had millions just waiting?" The word hung in the air between us. I hadn't mentioned how much the inheritance was worth, but Sarah had always been quick with numbers. How much? She asked, her voice suddenly quiet. Originally, about 800,000, I admitted. With investment growth over 29 years, it's now approximately $3.7 million. Sarah's face drained of color. $3.7 million, she repeated mechanically. And you've been working as a receptionist, living in a 2-bedroom apartment, buying store brand everything. I chose that life, I emphasized. Not because I had to, but because I valued the simplicity of it, and because I believed it was the right environment to raise you in. But why keep it secret after I was grown? After I had my own family? The hurt in her voice cut deep. You watched Kevin and me struggle during the recession. You saw us postpone having a second child because of finances. All that time, you could have helped, and you chose not to. The accusation stung, especially because there was truth in it. I had watched their struggles, offered modest help where I could, but never revealed the full extent of my resources. I planned to tell you, after I turned 65, I said, which was true. I had actually scheduled a meeting with my attorney to discuss how to approach it. Then the layoff happened, and your reaction to it changed things. Sarah flinched slightly at the reminder of how she had responded to news of my job loss. That's not fair. I was concerned about you. We both were. Were you? I asked quietly. Or were you concerned about what my financial situation might mean for you? Her face flushed. That's a horrible thing to say. Is it? You didn't ask what I wanted, Sarah. You decided what would happen to me, to my belongings, to my independence. You broke into my apartment and started packing it up without my permission. I had a key, and we were trying to help before you ended up homeless. The defensive note in her voice suggested she knew on some level that her actions had crossed a line. Help would have been asking what I needed, I pointed out. You assumed I had no options, no agency, no say in my own life. Because you let me believe that, she countered. You deliberately created this image of yourself as barely getting by. What was I supposed to think when you lost your job at 65? We had reached the crux of the matter. For nearly 3 decades, I had maintained a fiction of modest means for what I believed were good reasons. Sarah had internalized that fiction and built her understanding of me, and perhaps her own approach to money around it. When crisis hit, she had responded to the mother she thought she had, not the mother I actually was. You're right, I acknowledged. I did create that impression, and I maintained it long past the point when I should have been honest with you. That's on me, and I'm sorry for it. The simple apology seemed to take some of the fight out of her. She sank back against the sofa cushions, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't even know who you are anymore, she said quietly. The mother I thought I knew would never have kept something this huge from me, would never have moved to a beach town on a whim, would never have stood up to you when you tried to take over her life? I finished gently. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. We were trying to help. I know you believe that. But Sarah, put yourself in my position. Imagine if Emma and Tyler decided, your house was too big for you, packed up your belongings without asking, and informed you that you'd be living in their backyard from now on. How would that feel? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Terrible, she finally admitted. Humiliating. Yes, I agreed. It was. And it showed me something I hadn't wanted to see. That somewhere along the way, our relationship had become distorted. You stopped seeing me as a whole person and started seeing me as a problem to solve or a responsibility to manage. That's not true, she protested, but with less conviction than before. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what would make me happy? Not what made practical sense or what fit with your ideas about aging, but what would bring me joy? Sarah didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of nearly 3 decades of misunderstanding and hidden truths pressing down between us. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice subdued. "So now what? You're wealthy, living in Seabrook, and what? We just pretend none of this happened?" "No," I said firmly. "We don't pretend. We start over, with honesty this time. I've purchased a house in Seabrook, a beautiful place on the bluff overlooking the ocean. I'd like you and the family to visit when you're recovered, to see where I'm living now, to understand the choices I'm making for this chapter of my life." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing. "And the money? What are you planning to do with it?" The question might have sounded grasping just weeks ago, but now it felt more like a genuine attempt to understand this new version of her mother. "I'm going to live comfortably, but not extravagantly," I explained. "I've set up college funds for Emma and Tyler. I'm exploring some charitable foundations that align with causes I care about. And yes, I've allocated funds for family needs, not to control or to rescue, but to support and enhance all our lives." Sarah brushed away a tear with her good hand. "I still don't understand why you kept it secret for so long. After I was an adult, after I had my own family, what were you afraid
of it?" Man.
It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer required a level of honesty that might hurt her. But we had moved beyond the place where comforting lies served either of us. "I was afraid of exactly what happened when you thought I had no resources," I said gently. "I was afraid that money would change how you saw me, how you treated me, that I would become a resource rather than a person. And when you and Kevin responded to my job loss by immediately trying to take control of my life, those fears were validated. The painful truth hung between us." Sarah looked away, her profile rigid with emotion. "I need some time to process all this," she finally said. "It's a lot." "I know," I agreed. "And we have time now. No more secrets, no more pretending." As I left her to rest, I felt a curious lightness despite the difficult conversation. For the first time in decades, I had been completely honest with my daughter about who I was and what I had. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Too many assumptions had been built on shaky foundations for that. But at least now we could begin rebuilding our relationship based on truth rather than carefully maintained fictions. What I couldn't know as I prepared dinner for the returning teenagers was that Sarah's initial reaction was just the beginning, and that the real test of our relationship would come when Kevin returned from his conference to discover that his mother-in-law, whom he had so casually dismissed as financially dependent, was, in fact, wealthier than he was. The next 2 days passed in a strange, tense holding pattern. Sarah remained polite but distant, processing the revelation about my inheritance in quiet contemplation. The teenagers sensed the undercurrent of tension, but attributed it to their mother's accident rather than any deeper family drama. I maintained the caregiver role, preparing meals, helping Sarah with daily tasks, and trying to give her the space she clearly needed. On Thursday evening, Kevin's return shattered this fragile equilibrium. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard his key in the front door. Sarah had been napping but must have woken at the sound as I heard her calling out to him from the living room. Their muffled conversation continued for several minutes before Kevin appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression unreadable. "Margaret," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Sarah's told me about your situation." I continued stirring the pasta sauce I was making. "Has she? It's quite a revelation." He moved further into the kitchen, setting his briefcase on a counter. 3 decades of secrecy. I have to admit, I'm having trouble understanding why you would hide something like that from your own daughter. The accusatory undertone was unmistakable. I turned to face him directly. "I've explained my reasons to Sarah," I replied evenly. "It was a personal decision about how I wanted to live my life and raise my child." Kevin's professional smile didn't reach his eyes. A decision that caused considerable stress and hardship for your family. Did you ever consider how much easier Sarah's life might have been if she'd known about this safety net? The education opportunities, the freedom from student loans, Kevin. Sarah's voice interrupted from the doorway where she stood leaning against the frame, her cast-bound arm in a sling. We've been through this already. He turned toward her, his expression softening. I'm just trying to understand, honey. This affects all of us. The possessive plural didn't escape my notice. In Kevin's mind, my inheritance wasn't just my business. It was affecting them, which suggested he already viewed it as relevant to their financial planning. It's Mom's money, Sarah said, surprising me with her directness. She's explained why she kept it private, and while I don't agree with all her choices, I understand them better now. This was more support than I'd expected given our tense conversation 2 days earlier. Something had shifted in Sarah's thinking. Kevin's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course it's her money. I'm just concerned about the impact of all these secrets on our family trust. Relationships are built on honesty, after all. The hypocrisy of his statement, given how they had attempted to pack up my apartment without permission, was breathtaking. But before I could respond, Sarah spoke again. Like when you decided to renovate the pool house into a mother-in-law suite without discussing it with Mom first? That kind of honesty? Kevin looked genuinely startled by this challenge from his usually supportive wife. That was different. We were trying to help in a crisis. Were we? Sarah asked quietly. Or were we trying to control a situation that made us uncomfortable? Looking back, I'm not sure our motivations were as pure as we claimed. The unexpected alliance with Sarah warmed me even as Kevin's expression hardened. He gestured toward the stove where my sauce was still simmering. Perhaps we should table this discussion until after dinner, he suggested, his corporate conflict resolution training visibly kicking in. I'm sure we're all hungry, and Margaret has gone to such trouble. The subtle attempt to reposition me as the helpful domestic figure, cooking dinner for their family in their home, rather than an independent woman with resources of her own, was not lost on me. But I agreed that dinner came first, and the three of us moved through the routine of family mealtime with forced civility. The teenagers provided welcome distraction with stories from school, carefully monitored by both parents to prevent any mention of the underlying tension. It wasn't until after the children had retreated to their rooms for homework that Kevin broached the subject again, this time with a more strategic approach. So, Margaret, he began as I loaded the dishwasher, Sarah mentioned you've purchased a house in Seabrook. That must be exciting. It is, I confirmed, recognizing the probing question for what it was. It's a beautiful property with ocean views. I've always loved the coast but never had the opportunity to live near it until now. Oceanfront property in Seabrook must have been quite an investment, he continued, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. The market there has been extraordinarily competitive lately. I was fortunate to find something within my budget, I replied, deliberately vague. Kevin nodded, pretending understanding while clearly dissatisfied with my non-answer. And the rest of your inheritance? I imagine at your age you're thinking about estate planning, long-term care insurance, that sort of thing. There it was, the pivot from my current finances to my future plans, particularly those that might impact them. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly recognizing the directive questioning for what it was. My financial planning is well in hand, I assured him. My attorney has helped me establish appropriate structures for both my current needs and future contingencies. I'd be happy to review those with you, Kevin offered immediately. Financial planning is part of my professional expertise, after all, and family should help family navigate these complex matters. The same man who had been preparing to relegate me to a converted pool house was now positioning himself as my financial advisor. The audacity was almost admirable. That's very kind, I said, keeping my tone pleasant. but Thomas has been managing my affairs for nearly 30 years. I'm quite comfortable with his guidance." Kevin's smile tightened further. "Of course. Though sometimes a fresh perspective can be valuable, especially from someone with more contemporary market knowledge." The implied criticism of Thomas's expertise might have angered me weeks ago, but now it merely amused me. Kevin had no idea that Thomas Abernathy was one of the most respected estate attorneys on the East Coast, whose client list included several names Kevin would immediately recognize from financial magazines. "I'll keep that in mind," I said neutrally. Sarah had been watching this exchange with an increasingly troubled expression. "Kevin, Mom doesn't need financial advice. She's done just fine managing her inheritance for decades." "I'm sure she has," he replied smoothly. "I'm simply offering to help. That's what family does, especially when significant assets are involved." The naked transparency of his interest hung awkwardly in the air between us. "Speaking of family," I said, deciding to redirect the conversation, "I'd like to invite all of you to visit my new home once Sarah is feeling better. It would mean a lot to me to show you where I'm living now, perhaps have you stay for a weekend." The invitation seemed to catch both of them off guard. Kevin likely because it reinforced my independence, Sarah perhaps because it signaled a desire to maintain family connections despite our recent conflicts. "We'd like that," Sarah said before Kevin could respond. "Wouldn't we, Kevin?" He nodded, though his enthusiasm seemed forced. "Of course, once Sarah's recovered enough to travel comfortably." The evening concluded with strained politeness, and I returned to my hotel relieved to escape the atmosphere of unspoken agendas and recalculations that seemed to fill their home. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Sarah. "Can we talk tomorrow? Just the two of us. There's something I need to tell you." The cryptic message left me both curious and concerned. What more could there be to discuss after the revelations of the past few days? I arrived at Sarah's house the next morning to find Kevin already gone. An early meeting at the office, Sarah explained, and the teenagers off to school. She seemed better physically, moving more easily despite the cast, the bruising on her face beginning to fade into yellows and greens. We settled in the living room with coffee, and I waited for her to begin whatever conversation she had requested. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you told me about the inheritance," she started, her expression serious. "About money, about our relationship, about the values I thought you raised me with versus the ones you actually lived by." I nodded, bracing for another difficult discussion. "At first, I felt betrayed," she continued. "Like everything I thought I knew about our life was a lie. But the more I've reflected, the more I've realized something important." She paused, meeting my eyes directly. "You weren't a hypocrite, Mom. You lived exactly according to your values, even when you had the option not to." This wasn't the direction I had expected the conversation to take. "What do you mean?" "You had millions sitting in accounts somewhere, but you still worked a regular job, lived in a modest apartment, drove your cars until they practically fell apart. You could have chosen luxury at any point, but you didn't. It wasn't just a show for my benefit. It was how you actually wanted to live." Her insight surprised and touched me. "Yes," I acknowledged. "I never felt deprived or like I was sacrificing. That simple life suited me." "Which makes what Kevin and I tried to do even worse," she said quietly. "We didn't just disrespect your financial autonomy. We disrespected your entire life philosophy. We assumed that because you didn't have what we have, you must be unhappy or lacking something essential." The self-awareness in her reflection moved me deeply. "That means a lot to hear you say, Sarah." She twisted her coffee mug in her good hand, clearly working up to something more difficult. "There's something else you should know. The reason I asked to talk privately." She took a deep breath. "Kevin wants me to convince you to invest in his new development project." The admission hung in the air between us. "I see," I said carefully. "He's been talking about it since I told him about your inheritance. how your family connection would make you a natural investor in his latest venture. The discomfort in her voice was evident. He even suggested that it would be a way for you to make up for keeping the inheritance secret all these years. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable, but I kept my expression neutral for Sarah's. Saka. And what do you think about that? She met my eyes directly. I think it's wrong. I think he's seeing dollar signs instead of his mother-in-law. And I think it might be part of a pattern I've been ignoring for too long. This last statement caught my attention. What pattern? Sarah set her mug down, her expression troubled. The way he looks at relationships as transactions, the way he measures people's worth by their financial utility. She hesitated. The way he encouraged me to take control of your life when we thought you were broke, but now wants to involve you in his business dealings when he knows you're not. The insight demonstrated a level of awareness I hadn't expected from Sarah, especially about her husband's character. That must be difficult to recognize, I said gently. It is, she admitted. Especially because I see now that I bought into it too. I became the kind of person who would change the locks on her own mother's apartment rather than respect her autonomy. Her voice broke slightly. Who does that, Mom? What kind of daughter did I become? The pain in her question was raw and genuine. I moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her good hand in mine. You became someone who lost perspective, I said softly. We all do sometimes. The important thing is that you're seeing it now, questioning it. Tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry. For the moving truck, for the locks, for treating you like you couldn't make your own decisions. I was so fixated on solving what I saw as a financial problem that I completely lost sight of you as a person. The apology I had wanted but never expected to receive touched me deeply. I forgive you, I said simply. And I'm sorry, too, for maintaining a fiction that ultimately distorted our relationship. I thought I was teaching you important values, but maybe I was just creating confusion about who I really was. Sarah squeezed my hand. So where do we go from here? With the truth out? With Kevin's expectations? With everything? It was the question that had been hovering between us since the revelation of my inheritance. We start over, I suggested. With honesty, with boundaries, and with the understanding that love doesn't mean control. And Kevin's investment proposal? Also? Handle, Kevin, I assured her. You focus on healing, both your wrist and our relationship. As I drove back to my hotel that afternoon, I felt a cautious optimism about the future of my relationship with Sarah. The conversation had revealed a self-awareness and capacity for growth I hadn't been sure she possessed. The road ahead wouldn't be simple, especially with Kevin's financial interests now explicitly in play. But for the first time, I felt that Sarah and I might be truly aligned in a way we hadn't been in years. What I couldn't know then was that Kevin's investment proposal would prove to be far more problematic than either of us anticipated, leading to a final confrontation that would force Sarah to make choices I never wanted her to face. Choices about loyalty, integrity, and what truly constitutes family. Kevin didn't waste any time pursuing his investment agenda. The very evening, after my private conversation with Sarah, he arrived at my hotel with a professional leather portfolio and a dinner invitation to discuss some exciting opportunities. I agreed to join him at a nearby restaurant, curious to hear exactly what he had in mind. Throughout our meal, Kevin was attentive, charming, and focused entirely on rebuilding our relationship, or so it would appear to anyone observing our table. He asked about my new home, expressed interest in my plans for retirement, and reminisced about family gatherings as if the moving truck incident had never happened. It wasn't until after our entrees were cleared that he finally opened his portfolio and got to the real purpose of the dinner. I wanted to share something special with you, Margaret, he said, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. An opportunity I typically only offer to my closest clients. But given our family connection, the brochure showcased the Bluffs at Oak Ridge, an upscale development of luxury condominiums on what appeared to be former industrial land outside the city. The renderings showed sleek modern buildings, carefully landscaped green spaces, and amenities designed to appeal to affluent professionals and empty nesters. "It's a transformational project," Kevin explained enthusiastically. "We're converting a defunct manufacturing site into a premier residential community. The location is unmatched, just 20 minutes from downtown, with dedicated green space and views of the river." I paged through the materials, noting the emphasis on exclusivity and limited availability. "It looks impressive," I acknowledged, which was true enough. The design was attractive, if somewhat generic in the way of most luxury developments. "It's more than impressive." Kevin leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a valuable secret. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. We're offering a limited number of private investors the chance to get in before we open to institutional funding." "I see," I said neutrally. "And what kind of investment are you looking for?" Kevin named a figure that would have represented a significant portion of my inheritance, large enough to be meaningful to his project, but not so large as to appear grasping. "The projected returns are exceptional," he continued, pointing to a chart in the brochure. "We're estimating 18–22% ROI within the first 3 years." The return figures seemed optimistic to the point of fantasy, particularly in the current real estate market. But I kept my expression interested as Kevin elaborated on the project's potential, the guaranteed appreciation, and the exclusive nature of this opportunity. "I'd normally never offer this outside my professional network," he emphasized, "but family is different. I want to make sure you benefit from your newfound financial situation in the most advantageous way possible." His concern for my financial benefit would have been touching if it weren't so transparently self-serving. "It's certainly an interesting proposal," I said carefully. "I'll need to review it with my financial advisors, of course." Kevin's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should mention, this particular investment tier is only available for the next 2 weeks. After that, we move to institutional investors at different terms." The artificial time pressure, a classic sales tactic, confirmed my growing suspicions about both the investment and Kevin's character. "I understand," I assured him. "I'll be sure to have my team review it promptly." We parted with surface cordiality, Kevin clearly believing he had made progress toward securing a significant investment from his newly wealthy mother-in-law. What he didn't know was that I had already arranged for Thomas to investigate both Kevin's development company and this specific project the moment Sarah had mentioned his investment intentions. The following day, Thomas called with his findings. "It's not good, Margaret," he said without preamble. "The Bluffs at Oak Ridge exist mostly on paper at this point. The land has been purchased, but there are significant environmental remediation issues that aren't disclosed in any of the marketing materials. The projected returns are wildly optimistic given the location and current market conditions." "I suspected as much," I sighed. "Is it an outright scam, or just a risky investment with inflated projections?" "Somewhere in between," Thomas replied. "Kevin's company has completed other developments, but they've consistently underperformed their projected returns. This one appears particularly problematic due to the environmental issues, which will significantly delay construction and increase costs." The revelation wasn't entirely surprising, but it was nonetheless disappointing. The question now was how to handle this situation without creating an irreparable rift between Sarah and myself. Or worse, between Sarah and Kevin. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "From a purely financial perspective, I'd advise declining the investment immediately and clearly," Thomas said. "From a family perspective," he paused. "That's more complicated." Indeed it was. After thanking Thomas for his research, I spent the afternoon considering my options. By evening, I had made my decision and called Sarah to arrange a meeting, not at her house where Kevin might interrupt, but at a quiet cafe near my hotel. She arrived looking better than she had since the accident. Some color returned to her face, moving more easily despite the cast on her wrist. "Is everything okay?" she asked as she joined me at a corner table. "Your message sounded serious." "I had dinner with Kevin last night," I began, watching her face carefully. "He presented his investment opportunity for the bluffs at Oak Ridge." Sarah's expression fell. "I was afraid of that. What did you tell him?" "That I would consult my advisors," I replied honestly. "Which I have." Something in my tone must have alerted her to bad news. And I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Sarah, the investment isn't sound. There are significant undisclosed environmental issues with the property, and the projected returns are unrealistic at best." She closed her eyes briefly, a mixture of disappointment and resignation crossing her face. "Are you sure?" "Yes." My attorney had it thoroughly researched. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absently stirring her untouched coffee. "I was afraid it might be something like that," she finally said. "Kevin's been under tremendous pressure lately. His last 2 projects underperformed, and his investors are getting restless." The admission surprised me. Not just the content, but Sarah's willingness to acknowledge her husband's financial difficulties. "Has he discussed this with you?" I asked gently. "Not directly. He doesn't like to burden me with work concerns." The slight edge in her voice suggested this was a point of contention. "But I'm not blind. I've seen the late-night calls, the stress, the way he scrutinizes every household expense while still insisting on his country club membership. This glimpse into their marriage revealed tensions I hadn't fully appreciated." "I'm sorry, Sarah. That must be difficult." She looked up, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "What are you going to do about the investment?" It was the question I had been dreading, the one that placed me squarely between financial responsibility and family harmony. "I can't invest in it," I said quietly but firmly. "It would be throwing good money after bad. But I'm more concerned about how this affects you and your relationship with Kevin." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "You mean, what happens when my husband discovers my mother won't bail out his failing development project? Nothing good, I imagine." The candid assessment of her marriage was startling coming from the daughter who, just weeks earlier, had presented a united front with Kevin in planning my financial future. "This puts you in a terrible position," I acknowledged. "I'm sorry for that." She shook her head. "Don't be. This isn't your doing." She hesitated, then added, "Since your revelation about the inheritance, I've been reconsidering a lot of things, including my marriage." The admission hung in the air between us, weighty with implications. "In what way?" I asked carefully. "Kevin and we've always been aligned on practical matters. Finances, career goals, how to raise the kids. But this situation with you has forced me to see some fundamental differences in our values." She twisted her wedding ring absently. "The way he immediately pivoted from seeing you as a financial burden to seeing you as a potential investor, without ever considering you as just a person worthy of respect regardless of your bank account." The insight demonstrated a self-awareness I hadn't given Sarah credit for. "That must be painful to recognize," I said gently. "It is, especially because I see now that I was complicit in it." She met my eyes directly. "We need to tell him together that you won't be investing. And I need to be clear that I support your decision, even if it creates conflict in my marriage." Her willingness to stand with me rather than automatically siding with her husband marked a significant shift in our relationship, a rebalancing of priorities and loyalties I hadn't anticipated. "Are you sure?" I asked. "This is your marriage. Sarah, I don't want to come between you and Kevin." "You're not," she said firmly. "His choices are, and if those choices force me to pick sides, Well, I've already made one terrible mistake in choosing financial considerations over family loyalty. I won't make it twice. We agreed to meet with Kevin the following evening at Sarah's house, after the teenagers were occupied with homework. I arrived to find Sarah tense but resolved, Kevin oblivious to the conversation ahead as he greeted me with the newfound warmth he had adopted since learning of my inheritance. Once we were settled in the living room, Sarah began. Kevin, Mom. And I need to discuss something important with you about the Bluffs investment. His expression brightened, clearly anticipating good news. Yes? Margaret? Have you made a decision? I have, I confirmed. After careful review with my financial advisors, I've decided not to invest in the project. The smile remained frozen on his face for a moment before slowly fading. I see. May I ask why? The returns are exceptional, and the opportunity is fundamentally unsound, I interrupted gently but firmly. The land has serious environmental remediation issues that aren't disclosed in your materials, and the projected returns are unrealistic given current market conditions and the location. Kevin's face flushed. With all due respect, Margaret, I'm a professional developer with years of experience. I'm not sure what advisors you're consulting, but clearly they don't understand the unique advantages of this particular property. My attorney had the project thoroughly researched by top professionals in commercial real estate, I replied calmly. The environmental reports alone indicate remediation costs that would significantly impact any potential returns. Kevin's expression hardened as he realized I had investigated his project in detail. He turned to Sarah, clearly expecting her support. This is ridiculous. Your mother is getting bad advice from people who don't understand the local market or the specifics of this development. Instead of the automatic alliance he clearly expected, Sarah straightened in her seat. Kevin, I support Mom's decision. It's her money, and she has every right to invest it, or not invest it, as she sees fit. The betrayal in his eyes was palpable. You can't be serious. After everything we've discussed about how this investment could secure our future, help with the kids' college funds, my inheritance isn't responsible for securing your financial future, I interjected quietly. And I've already established college funds for Emma and Tyler separate from any investment considerations. This information, which I hadn't yet shared with either of them, momentarily derailed Kevin's building anger. You've what? I've set up educational trusts for both my grandchildren, I confirmed. Thomas helped me establish them last month. They'll provide for undergraduate and graduate education at any accredited institution. Sarah looked as surprised as Kevin. Mom, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, I said simply. They're my grandchildren, and education is important. To me? Kevin recovered quickly, recalibrating his approach. That's very generous, Margaret. All the more reason why the Bluffs investment makes sense as part of your overall portfolio. The returns would help grow those educational trusts even further. His pivot was almost impressive in its shamelessness, using my gift to my grandchildren as leverage for his struggling development project. My decision is final, I stated firmly. I will not be investing in the Bluffs or any other development projects at this time. Kevin's professional facade finally cracked. This is absurd. You sit on millions for decades, letting Sarah think you were barely getting by, and now you're refusing to help when there's an actual opportunity on the table? What kind of mother does that? The kind who recognizes a bad investment, Sarah answered before I could, her voice steady despite the tension in her face. And the kind who doesn't deserve to be pressured or manipulated by anyone. The statement landed like a physical blow. Kevin stared at his wife, disbelief and betrayal evident in his expression. You're taking her side? After she lied to you? For 30 years? This isn't about sides, Sarah replied. It's about respect. Mom has the right to make her own financial decisions without pressure or guilt trips. The argument escalated quickly from there, with Kevin's frustration boiling. over into accusations and recriminations directed at both of us. He called me selfish and deceptive, accused Sarah of destructive loyalty to a mother who never showed the same to her, and finally stormed out of the house after declaring that if the Bluffs project failed, it would be on my conscience. After the front door slammed behind him, Sarah and I sat in stunned silence for several moments. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I never meant to create this kind of conflict in your marriage." Sarah sighed deeply, looking exhausted but somehow resolute. "This isn't about you, Mom. Not really. It's about patterns that have existed in our marriage for years. Patterns I've chosen to ignore until now." The wisdom and self-awareness in her response surprised me once again. "What happens now?" I asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever happens, I won't make the same mistake twice. I won't sacrifice what I know is right for the sake of financial security or marital peace." As I drove back to my hotel that night, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months, from the day I'd lost my job and nearly lost my independence to this moment of painful but necessary truth. Sarah and I had both been forced to confront uncomfortable realities about ourselves and our relationships. We had both made mistakes, harbored secrets, and damaged trust. But somehow, through that difficult process, we had found our way back to something essential, a mother-daughter bond based on authenticity rather than performance, on mutual respect rather than financial dependencies or expectations. What I couldn't know that night was that the confrontation with Kevin would prove to be a turning point not just in my relationship with Sarah, but in her marriage as well, leading to difficult choices, painful growth, and ultimately, a new kind of family configuration that none of us could have imagined at the beginning of this journey. The next 6 weeks unfolded in ways none of us could have predicted. 3 days after our confrontation with Kevin, Sarah called to tell me she had asked him to move out temporarily while they reassessed their marriage. The decision had come after discovering that the Bluffs project was in even more trouble than we had realized. Kevin had leveraged their personal assets, including a second mortgage on their home, without fully disclosing the extent of the risk to Sarah. "I don't know if our marriage can survive this," she admitted during one of our increasingly frequent phone calls. "It's not just the financial deception, though that's serious enough. It's realizing that we have fundamentally different values about money, family, and respect." As Sarah navigated this painful personal transition, her physical recovery progressed steadily. The cast came off her wrist, revealing a slightly crooked but functional arm. The bruises on her face faded completely. And something in her spirit seemed to strengthen even as her marriage weakened, a resilience I recognized from her childhood but hadn't seen in years. Meanwhile, I had settled fully into my new home in Seabrook, furnishing it room by room with carefully selected pieces that reflected my personal taste rather than practicality or budget constraints. The house took on a character that was entirely my own, comfortable yet elegant, with large windows maximizing the spectacular ocean views and a garden patio where I could enjoy my morning coffee, watching seabirds wheel above the waves. Throughout this period, I extended repeated invitations for Sarah and the teenagers to visit, but the timing never seemed right. Emma and Tyler were busy with end-of-semester activities, and Sarah was consumed with straightening out the financial mess Kevin had created. So when Sarah called in early June suggesting they finally come for the upcoming weekend, I was both delighted and somewhat nervous. "Are you sure the timing is right?" I asked, aware of the ongoing turbulence in her marriage. "It's perfect timing, actually," Sarah replied, a new decisiveness in her voice. "The kids need a break from the tension at home, and I've finally sorted out enough of the financial tangle to take a breath. Besides, I think seeing your new life might help all of us gain some perspective." The day of their arrival dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt and summer flowers. I had spent the previous day preparing, stocking the refrigerator with their favorite foods, setting up the guest rooms with fresh linens and small welcome baskets, making sure the teenagers would have activities available to keep them entertained. When their car pulled into my circular driveway shortly after noon, I felt a curious mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would be the first time Sarah would see my new home, the physical manifestation of my financial reality and independent choices. Would she feel jealous? Resentful of the luxury I had denied her knowledge of during her formative years? My concerns evaporated the moment they stepped from the car. Emma and Tyler gaped openly at the house in spectacular ocean view, while Sarah looked around with an expression of genuine pleasure rather than envy. "Mom, it's absolutely beautiful," she said, embracing me warmly. "It suits you perfectly." This simple statement, free from the undercurrent of judgment or comparison I had feared, set the tone for the entire visit. As I showed them through the house, pointing out architectural features and sharing small stories about finding particular furnishings, Sarah responded with enthusiastic interest rather than calculation or assessment. The teenagers quickly claimed the back patio with its infinity-edge pool overlooking the ocean, leaving Sarah and me to talk privately in the kitchen as I prepared lunch. "You seem happy here," she observed, watching me move comfortably around the spacious kitchen. "More yourself, somehow." "I am," I acknowledged, "though I'm still figuring out exactly who that self is, after all these years of living differently." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about that, about authenticity and the faces we show the world. You lived simply not because you had to, but because you chose to. I built my life around financial security because I thought I had to, not because it was what truly mattered to me." The insight demonstrated how deeply she had been reflecting on her own values and choices. "And what does truly matter to you, Sarah?" I asked gently. She gazed out the kitchen window toward the ocean, where Emma and Tyler were now laughing as they dangled their feet in the pool. "Family. Not the appearance of family or the financial structure of family, but the genuine connection. Knowing that the people you love see you as you really are and value you regardless of what you can provide or how you perform." Her words could have been my own from decades earlier, when I had made the decision to keep Uncle Edward's inheritance secret. The difference was that Sarah had come to this wisdom through painful experience rather than philosophical choice. That evening, after a day of swimming, beach walking, and reconnecting without the shadow of financial concerns for the first time, in our adult relationship, I decided it was time for the second revelation I had been saving. As we sat on the patio watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in fiery oranges and pinks, I handed Sarah a heavy manila envelope. "What's this?" she asked, looking puzzled. "Something I've been working on with Thomas for the past month," I explained. "A trust structure I'd like you to consider." She opened the envelope tentatively, perhaps expecting another revelation about hidden assets or financial secrets. Instead, she found legal documents outlining a family foundation bearing both our names, the Wilson Baker Foundation for Educational Opportunity. "Mom?" She looked up questioningly. "I've allocated $1 million to start," I explained. "The foundation will provide scholarships for single parents returning to education and for first-generation college students. I'd like you to co-chair it with me if you're willing, Sarah." Stared at the documents, her expression moving from confusion to understanding to a kind of quiet wonder. "You want us to do this together?" "Yes," I said simply. "Your perspective would be invaluable, and it's a legacy we could build that goes beyond just our family, but only if it's something that resonates with you." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "It does. So much." She looked back at the sunset, gathering her thoughts. "When you first told me about the inheritance, I was hurt that you hadn't shared it, angry that you'd let me struggle when you could have helped. But now I understand that the greatest gift wasn't the money itself, it was the chance to discover who I am apart from financial pressure or constraint." "And who are you?" I asked softly. Her smile was contemplative, tinged with both sadness and hope. Still figuring that out. But I know I'm someone who wants her life to have meaning beyond a comfortable bank account. Someone who wants her children to understand the difference between wealth and worth. She met my gaze directly. Someone who's more like her mother than she ever realized. The moment felt like a completion of a circle. The daughter finally seeing the mother not as a role or a resource, but as a whole person with complex motivations and values. The rest of the weekend passed in a blend of relaxation and thoughtful conversation. Sarah shared more details about her separation from Kevin, how his initial anger had eventually given way to reluctant acknowledgement of his financial deceptions, how they were working with mediators to determine next steps for their marriage, how the teenagers were adjusting to the new reality with surprising resilience. By Sunday afternoon, as they prepared to return home, something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. The tensions and resentments that had dominated our interactions for months had been replaced by a new kind of partnership. Two adult women with a shared history and values, ready to move forward with honesty rather than performance or pretense. "We should do this again," Sarah said as she embraced me beside their packed car. "A proper housewarming party with friends from your new community. Let's celebrate this beautiful home and this new chapter in your life." The suggestion, so different from her earlier attempts to control my living situation, touched me deeply. "I'd like that very much," I agreed. Throughout the following weeks, Sarah and I spoke regularly, planning the housewarming party and discussing initial steps for the foundation. The event was scheduled for a Saturday in early July, with a guest list that included both my new friends from Seabrook and selected family members and old acquaintances. The morning of the party dawned perfect. For an outdoor celebration, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and summer flowers. Sarah arrived early with the teenagers to help with final preparations, arranging flowers and setting up the catering service I had hired for the occasion. As guests began to arrive, I watched Sarah move comfortably through my home, greeting people warmly and pointing out features of the house with evident pride. There was no hint of the woman who had once tried to pack up my apartment without permission, no trace of the daughter who had seen my financial independence as a threat rather than a celebration. Midway through the party, as guests mingled on the patio and lawn overlooking the ocean, Sarah clinked a glass for attention. The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward her. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "To my mother, Margaret, who has taught me that it's never too late to start a new chapter, never too late to be honest, about who you are and what you value." She turned to face me directly. "Mom, 6 months ago, when you lost your job, I thought I needed to save you. What I didn't realize was that you were about to save me. From a life measured only in dollars and cents, rather than meaning and connection." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering as glasses were raised. Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "This beautiful home isn't just a place. It's a statement about living authentically and on your own terms. Thank you for showing me that true wealth isn't what's in your bank account, but what's in your heart." As applause broke out among the guests, I moved to embrace my daughter, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought us to this moment of mutual understanding and respect. "Thank you," I whispered in her ear, "for seeing me, really seeing me, at last." "And thank you," she whispered back, "for never giving up on me." Even when I gave up on you, later that evening, after the last guests had departed and we sat together on the patio watching stars emerge over the darkening ocean, Sarah asked the question I had been anticipating for months. "Do you ever regret it? Keeping the inheritance secret for all those years?" I considered carefully before answering. "I regret that it created distance between us when the truth finally emerged. I regret that I underestimated your capacity to handle both wealth and the lack of it with grace. But no, I don't regret the fundamental choice to live simply and raise you with an emphasis on earning rather than inheriting. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It shaped me in ways I'm only now beginning to understand, for better and worse. That's the thing about parenting, I replied. You make choices based on what you believe is right, knowing you'll never see all the consequences, good or bad. All you can do is act from love and hope wisdom follows. Well, Sarah said, smiling as she raised her wine glass in another small toast. Here's to wisdom, hard won but finally found, and to second chances at understanding each other. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months, from the day my daughter had changed the locks on my apartment to this moment of genuine connection and mutual respect. The inheritance that had remained secret for decades had ultimately revealed something far more valuable than money. The true nature of our relationship and the values that would guide its next chapter. 6 months after being kicked out of my apartment with just 2 suitcases and nowhere to go, I had found not just a beautiful new home, but a transformed relationship with my daughter, one built on honesty, respect, and the shared understanding that true wealth lies not in what you own, but in who you become and how you love. 1 year later. The autumn breeze carried the scent of salt and fallen leaves as I stood on my patio, watching waves crash against the rocky shoreline below. A year had passed since the housewarming party that had marked the new beginning in my relationship with Sarah, and the changing seasons seemed an appropriate metaphor for the transformations in our lives. My phone chimed with a text message. Just picked up the cake. We'll be there by 4. Love you, Mom. I smiled at Sarah's message, still appreciating the easy warmth that now characterized our communication. Today was special, the official launch event for the Wilson Baker Foundation for Educational Opportunity. After months of paperwork, planning, and careful structuring with Thomas's help, we were celebrating our first 10 scholarship recipients with an intimate gathering at my home. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Thomas, elegant as always, in a tailored suit despite the casual nature of our gathering. Margaret, he greeted me warmly. The place looks wonderful. I welcomed him inside, where autumn flower arrangements and elegant but understated decorations transformed the living and dining areas for our celebration. Thank you for everything, Thomas. We couldn't have made this happen without you. The legal structure was the easy part, he replied, following me to the kitchen. The vision was all yours and Sarah's. We chatted as I finished preparing a charcuterie. Bored, Thomas updating me on the continued growth of my investments and the progress of several charitable initiatives he'd helped me establish over the past year. At 72, he was technically semi-retired, but had remained actively involved in managing my affairs, becoming not just an advisor, but a friend in the process. How are things with Sarah and the children? He asked, accepting the glass of wine I offered. Better than I could have imagined, I admitted. After everything that happened with Kevin, I was worried about how the divorce would affect all of them. But they've shown remarkable resilience. And they had. The separation that had begun during my first weekend visit to Seabrook had progressed to formal divorce proceedings when Kevin's financial deceptions had fully come to light. The Bluffs at Oak Ridge project had ultimately failed spectacularly, with environmental remediation costs far exceeding even the pessimistic projections in Thomas's report. Kevin had been forced to declare bankruptcy, both business and personal, and the fallout had been messy and painful for everyone involved. Yet, through that difficult process, Sarah had discovered a strength and clarity I'd always known she possessed, but had rarely seen her exercise. She had negotiated a fair settlement that prioritized stability for the teenagers, returned to work, part-time at an architectural firm where she'd interned decades earlier, and begun building a life defined by her own values rather than external expectations of success. The foundation seems to have been therapeutic for her, Thomas observed. For both of us, I agreed. It's given us a shared purpose that transcends our past misunderstandings. Over the past year, Sarah and I had worked closely to establish the Foundation's mission and selection criteria, interview candidates, and build relationships with local colleges. The process had allowed us to discover each other's strengths and perspectives in a context entirely separate from our family dynamics. I had been impressed by Sarah's insight and compassion, while she had frequently expressed surprise at my business acumen and strategic thinking, aspects of myself I'd kept carefully hidden during her childhood. The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of Sarah and the teenagers. Moments later, they burst through the door carrying bags and boxes, Sarah with an elegant cake box, Emma with flowers, and Tyler struggling with what appeared to be framed certificates. "We're not late, are we?" Sarah asked, setting down the cake box to embrace me. At 43, she looked younger than she had a year ago. The stress lines around her eyes softened, her movements more relaxed and confident. "Right on time," I assured her. "The first guests should arrive in about an hour." "Grandma, wait until you see the certificates," Tyler said enthusiastically. At 17, he had shot up another few inches and was now taller than everyone in the family. "I designed them myself in my digital arts class." "They're really good," Emma added, arranging her flowers in a vase. At 19, she had just started her freshman year at the state university, the first major family event her father had missed due to his relocation to another state following the bankruptcy. As Tyler proudly displayed the certificates he'd created for our scholarship recipients, I caught Sarah watching us with a soft expression. "What?" I asked when our eyes met. "Just thinking about how different everything is from this time last year," she replied. "Remember when I was worried about you affording your apartment? And now look at us, giving away scholarship money and hosting foundation events." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Our roles had completely reversed. Sarah, who had once tried to take control of my finances, was now rebuilding her own life after Kevin's financial implosion. And I, who had lived so modestly for decades, was now openly using my wealth to create opportunities for others. "Life has a way of upending our expectations," I observed. "Thank goodness for that," Sarah replied with feeling. The scholarship recipients and their families began arriving at 5, filling my home with an energy and excitement that made every difficult moment of the past year worthwhile. Young people who would be the first in their families to attend college, single parents returning to education after raising children, adults seeking career changes to pursue long-deferred dreams. Each had a story that resonated with either Sarah or me in different ways. As I watched Sarah confidently addressing our guests, explaining the Foundation's mission and introducing each scholarship recipient, pride swelled in my chest. This poised, compassionate woman had emerged from the crucible of the past year with a clarity of purpose I'd always hoped she would find. During a quiet moment as guests mingled on the patio enjoying the sunset, Sarah joined me at the railing overlooking the ocean. "I've been thinking about creating a separate scholarship category," she said, her expression thoughtful. "For grandparents raising grandchildren. There are so many older adults taking on parenting responsibilities a second time around, often with limited resources." "That's a wonderful idea," I agreed. "We could structure it differently to accommodate their specific needs." Sarah nodded, already considering the practical aspects. "We'd need to allow for part-time study, maybe include childcare subsidies." As she outlined her thoughts, I marveled at how naturally she had embraced the Foundation's work. What had begun as my attempt to create a meaningful legacy had evolved into a genuine partnership that played to both our strengths. "Mom," she said suddenly, interrupting her own flow of ideas. "Are you happy? With everything? The house, Seabrook, the Foundation, all of it?" The question caught me by surprise with its directness. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Happier than I've been in many years. Are you?" Sarah gazed out at the darkening ocean. "Getting there," she said. "The divorce has been harder than I expected. not financially, but emotionally. Recognizing how much of my identity was wrapped up in that marriage, in presenting a certain image to the world. She turned to face me directly. But I'm building something new now, something authentic. And I have you to thank for showing me that's possible at any age. You did the hard part yourself, I reminded her. Facing the truth about Kevin, about your marriage, about what you really value. That took tremendous courage. I had a good example, she replied simply. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed with congratulations and well wishes, Sarah, the teenagers, and I collapsed onto the living room sofas in contented exhaustion. That went really well, Emma declared, kicking off her shoes. I got Andrea's contact information. The woman going back for her teaching degree? I want to interview her for my sociology assignment on non-traditional students. And I'm going to help Jason set up a website for his tutoring business, Tyler added. He's really good at math but knows nothing about digital presence. The easy way the teenagers had connected with our scholarship recipients filled me with hope for their generation. Neither Emma nor Tyler seemed scarred by their parents' divorce or their father's financial downfall. If anything, they appeared more grounded and compassionate than before. What about the spring application cycle? Sarah asked me, our minds naturally turning to next steps. Should we expand the eligibility criteria or keep it focused? As we discussed future plans for the foundation, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I had been a newly unemployed 65-year-old being pushed out of my apartment by a daughter who thought she knew what was best for me. Now, we were partners in a foundation, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect, rather than obligation or financial dependence. Later that night, after Sarah and the teenagers had departed for home, I sat alone on my patio with a final glass of wine, watching stars appear over the dark ocean. My phone chimed with a text message from Sarah. Thank you for today, for everything. I'm so proud of what we're building together. The simple message brought tears to my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the profound gratitude that comes with unexpected gifts. The inheritance from Uncle Edward had provided financial security, yes, but its greatest value had been in forcing a long-overdue reckoning between mother and daughter. Without that catalyst, we might have continued our carefully choreographed dance of assumptions and unexpressed truths indefinitely. Sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive disguised as crises. Sometimes we need to lose what we think matters, to discover what truly does. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all, but the wisdom that comes from facing difficult truths with courage and compassion. As I raised my glass in a silent toast to the stars above, I felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with my oceanfront home or the millions in my investment accounts. True wealth, I had finally learned, isn't measured by what you have, but by who you love and how authentically you live. And by that measure, despite all the pain and conflict of the past year, I had never been richer. If you found value in this epilogue to my journey with Sarah, please subscribe to my channel for more stories about family relationships, second acts in life, and finding purpose at any age. Remember that it's never too late to rewrite your story or rebuild connections that matter. Thank you for being part of this journey. In the month following our foundation launch, life settled into a new rhythm that still sometimes surprised me with its contrast to my previous existence. Each Tuesday morning, Sarah would arrive at my home with her laptop and a stack of folders, and we would spend hours reviewing new scholarship applications, discussing foundation investments, and planning outreach events. These working sessions had become a highlight of my week, not just for the meaningful work we accomplished, but for the companionship they provided. Did you see this application? Sarah asked one crisp November morning, sliding a folder across my kitchen island where we had spread out our materials. The woman raising her 3 grandchildren while trying to finish her nursing degree. Her essay nearly made me cry. I reviewed the application, noting the careful budget the woman had outlined, and the heartfelt explanation of how her grandchildren's parents had been lost to the opioid crisis. "Let's flag this one for priority consideration." I agreed. As we worked, I couldn't help but marvel at how naturally Sarah had taken to philanthropic work. The daughter who had once been so focused on financial security and maintaining appearances now spoke passionately about structural barriers to education and the transformative power of opportunity. The evolution in her thinking wasn't just about money. It reflected a deeper shift in how she understood success and fulfillment. "You know," Sarah said during a break, looking out at the ocean view that still took my breath away every morning, "I've been thinking about what you said when you first told me about Uncle Edward's inheritance, about wanting me to develop my own work ethic instead of relying on inherited wealth." I nodded, curious where she was heading with this reflection. "I was so angry then," she continued. "I felt cheated out of advantages I could have had. But watching Emma now—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "She's working part-time at that coffee shop while taking a full course load. Coming home exhausted but proud of earning her own spending money. I see the confidence it gives her, the sense of capability. And I wonder if that's what you wanted for me." "It was," I confirmed gently. "Though I never intended for you to feel financially insecure or anxious. There's a balance I probably didn't navigate perfectly." Sarah's smile held a new wisdom. "Parenting doesn't come with perfect answers, does it? Just trade-offs and best guesses." That insight into the complexity of parental choices, coming from my daughter who was now reflecting on her own parenting decisions, was perhaps the greatest gift of our reconciliation. Beyond our foundation work, my life in Seabrook had blossomed in unexpected ways. I had joined a local painting class, discovering a talent for watercolors I'd never had time to explore during my working years. My paintings, mostly seascapes and local landscapes, were modest in skill, but brought me immense satisfaction. 3 of them now hung in my living room, their imperfections reminders of the joy of learning something new at 66. I had also developed a circle of friends who knew nothing of my previous life or the family drama that had precipitated my move to Seabrook. To them, I was simply Margaret, the retired executive assistant who had chosen their seaside community for her golden years. The simplicity of these relationships was refreshing, based on shared interests and genuine connection rather than history or obligation. Sarah's life had undergone even more dramatic changes. After the divorce was finalized in February, she had sold the 2-large family home and purchased a charming craftsman-style house closer to downtown. The downsizing had been both practical, accommodating her reduced finances following Kevin's bankruptcy, and symbolic of her new priorities. "It's funny," she told me during one of our Tuesday sessions. "I spent years thinking bigger was better. Bigger house, bigger car, bigger investment portfolio. Now I feel like I can breathe in this smaller space. Everything has intention, nothing's there just for show." Her part-time return to architecture had gradually evolved into a specialized practice, focusing on accessible design for aging homeowners. Inspired, she admitted, by watching me adapt my Seabrook home with aging in place, features that were both functional and beautiful. "Remember when I tried to move you into our pool house?" she had asked ruefully one day as we discussed a particularly elegant bathroom renovation she'd designed for an elderly client. As if one-size-fits-all senior living was the only option. The teenagers, too, were finding their way forward with surprising resilience. Emma had struggled initially with the divorce, particularly with her father's move to another state and subsequent remarriage to a younger colleague. But her freshman year at university had opened new horizons, introducing her to diverse perspectives and possibilities beyond the affluent suburban values that had dominated her childhood. Tyler, now in his senior year of high school, had channeled his energy into digital design and community service, inspired partly by our foundation work. He had created a mentoring program pairing tech-savvy high school students with seniors who wanted to learn digital skills, a project that had earned him both college scholarships and local recognition. Even my relationship with Kevin had found A kind of resolution, though not one I could have anticipated. 6 months after moving away, he had called me directly, not through Sarah, to apologize for his behavior regarding the Bluff's investment and the attempted control of my living situation. I was desperate, he admitted during that unexpected conversation. The development was failing, investors were pulling out, and I saw your inheritance as a potential salvation. It wasn't about you at all, which is exactly the problem. I treated you as a resource rather than a person. The apology had seemed genuine, if belated, and I had accepted it graciously. While Kevin remained somewhat estranged from Sarah and the children, geographical distance and his new marriage creating both physical and emotional barriers, at least the active animosity had dissipated. Thomas, my attorney and now friend, had become a regular presence in my life beyond our professional relationship. Widowed for many years, he had initially declined my invitations to non-business social gatherings, maintaining a professional distance. But gradually, as our foundation work brought us into more frequent contact, that boundary had softened. We were nothing more than friends, both of us too settled in our independent lives for romantic entanglements. But his company at occasional dinners and local cultural events added a dimension to my life I hadn't realized I was missing. Intellectual companionship with someone who shared my generational references and life experiences. In the quieter moments of my new life, I sometimes reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed a painful crisis into this peaceful, purposeful existence. Had I not lost my job at 65? Had Sarah not revealed her conditional view of my worth through her reaction to that loss, I might never have found the courage to reinvent my life so completely. I might have continued my careful performance of modesty and self-sufficiency indefinitely, missing the opportunity to live authentically and to know my daughter as the woman she truly was, rather than the daughter I had carefully raised. Perhaps that was the most profound lesson of the past 18 months. That it's never too late to shed the protective facades we construct, never too late to allow ourselves to be fully seen, never too late to rebuild relationships on foundations of truth rather than comfortable illusions.